The only fence against the world is a thorough knowledge of it. I have always thought the actions of men the best interpreters of their thoughts. As people are walking all the time, in the same spot, a path appears. Government has no other end, but the preservation of property. All mankind, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. It is of great use to the sailor to know the length of his line, though he cannot with it fathom all the depths of the ocean. Reading furnishes the mind only with materials of knowledge. It is thinking that makes what we read ours. No man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience. The Bible is one of the greatest blessings bestowed by God on the children of men. It has God for its author, salvation for its end, and truth without any mixture for its matter. It is all pure. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has a right to, but himself. New opinions are always suspected, and usually opposed, without any other reason but because they are not already common. The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of created beings capable of law, where there is no law, there is no freedom. There cannot be greater rudeness than to interrupt another in the current of his discourse. Reverie is when ideas float in our mind without reflection or regard of the understanding. Education begins the gentleman, but reading, good company, and reflection must finish him. The improvement of understanding is for two ends. First, our own increase of knowledge. Secondly, to enable us to deliver that knowledge to others. All men are liable to error, and most men are, in many points, by passion or interest, under temptation to it. A sound mind in a sound body is a short, but full description of a happy state in this world. He that has these two, has little more to wish for, and he that wants either of them, will be little the better for anything else. There is frequently more to be learned from the unexpected questions of a child than the discourses of men. Our incomes are like our shoes. If too small, they gall and pinch us, but if too large, they cause us to stumble and to trip. An excellent man, like precious metal, is in every way invariable. A villain, like the beams of a balance, is always varying, upwards and downwards. To prejudge other men's notions before we have looked into them is not to show their darkness, but to put out our own eyes. The dread of evil is a much more forcible principle of human actions than the prospect of good. Where there is no property there is no injustice. To love our neighbor as ourselves is such a truth for regulating human society, that by that alone one might determine all the cases in social morality. Parents wonder why the streams are bitter, when they themselves have poisoned the fountain. The reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property. It is easier for a tutor to command than to teach. I attribute the little I know to my not having been ashamed to ask for information, and to my rule of conversing with all descriptions of men on those topics that form their own peculiar professions and pursuits. I have spent more than half a lifetime trying to express the tragic moment. Fortitude is the guard and support of the other virtues. We should have a great fewer disputes in the world if words were taken for what they are, the signs of our ideas only, and not for things themselves. Things of this world are in so constant a flux, that nothing remains long in the same state. The discipline of desire is the background of character. It is one thing to show a man that he is in an error, and another to put him in possession of the truth. One unerring mark of the love of truth is not entertaining any proposition with greater assurance than the proofs it is built upon will warrant. Where all is but dream, reasoning and arguments are of no use, truth and knowledge nothing. Our deeds disguise us. People need endless time to try on their deeds, until each knows the proper deeds for him to do. But every day, every hour, rushes by. There is no time. Anyone reflecting upon the thought he has of the delight, which any present or absent thing is apt to produce in him, has the idea we call love. Fashion for the most part is nothing but the ostentation of riches. Man hath by nature a power to preserve his property, that is, his life, liberty, and estate, against the injuries and attempts of other men. Nature never makes excellent things for mean or no uses. Nobody is going to let anybody's children play on something that is unsafe. There is just no way. Our Savior's great rule, that we should love our neighbors as ourselves, is such a fundamental truth for the regulating of human society, that, by that alone, one might without difficulty determine all the cases and doubts in social morality. We just want to show the people of this town what the benefits are. There being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species should be equal amongst one another without subordination or subjection. Reading furnishes the mind only with material for knowledge. It is thinking that makes what we read ours. It is so vital to everybody who has a stake in the downtown. It is vital to anyone who lives here. It is going to put us on the map. No man's knowledge here can go beyond experience. An essay concerning human understanding. If punishment makes not the will supple, it hardens the offender. The great question, about power, is who should have it. Every man must some time or other be trusted to himself. He would be laughed at, that should go about to make a fine dancer out of a country hedger, at past 50. And he will not have much better success, who shall endeavor, at that age, to make a man reason well, or speak handsomely, who has never been used to it, though you should lay before him a collection of all the best precepts of logic or oratory. Words, in their primary or immediate signification, stand for nothing but the ideas in the mind of him who uses them. Some eyes want spectacles to see things clearly and distinctly, but let not those that use them therefore say nobody can see clearly without them. The next thing is by gentle degrees to accustom children to those things they are too much afraid of. But here great caution is to be used, that you do not make too much haste, nor attempt this cure too early, for fear lest you increase the mischief instead of remedying it. The first step to get this noble and manly steadiness is, carefully keep children from frights of all kinds, when they are young. Instances of such who in a weak timorous mind, have borne, all their whole lives through, the effects of a fright when they were young, are everywhere to be seen, and therefore as much as may be to be prevented. Untruth being unacceptable to the mind of man, there is no other defense left for absurdity but obscurity. There is not so contemptible a plant or animal that does not confound the most enlarged understanding. Reason must be our last judge and guide in everything. All men by nature are equal in that equal right that every man hath to his natural freedom, without being subjected to the will or authority of any other man. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Memory is the power to revive again in our minds those ideas which after imprinting have disappeared, or have been laid aside out of sight. Liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others. It is labor indeed that puts the difference on everything. Nothing is in the intellect that was not first in the senses. Since the great foundation of fear is pain, the way to harden and fortify children against fear and danger is to accustom them to suffer pain. Thus parents, by humoring and cockering them when little, corrupt the principles of nature in their children, and wonder afterwards to taste the bitter waters, when they themselves have poisoned the fountain. Curiosity should be as carefully cherished in children, as other appetites suppressed. He that denies any of the doctrines that Christ has delivered to be true, denies him to be sent from God, and consequently to be the Messiah, and so ceases to be a Christian. It is ambition enough to be employed as an underlaborer in clearing the ground a little, and removing some of the rubbish that lies in the way to knowledge. To be rational is so glorious a thing, that two-legged creatures generally content themselves with the title. If all be a dream, then he doth but dream that he makes the question, and so it is not much matter that a waking man should answer him. As much land as a man tills, plants, improves, cultivated, and can use the product of, so much is his property. He by his labor does, as it were, enclose it from the common. It is vain to find fault with those arts of deceiving wherein men find pleasure to be deceived. Till a man can judge whether they be truths or not, his understanding is but little improved, and thus men of much reading, though greatly learned, but may be little knowing. Is it worth the name of freedom to be at liberty to play the fool? He that thinks absolute power purifies men's blood, and corrects the baseness of human nature, need read the history of this, or any other age, to be convinced to the contrary. Set the mind to work, and apply the thoughts vigorously to the business, for it holds in the struggles of the mind, as in those of war, that to think we shall conquer is to conquer. These two, I say, viz. External material things, as the objects of sensation, and the operations of our own minds within, as the objects of reflection, are to me the only originals from whence all our ideas take their beginnings. Firmness or stiffness of the mind is not from adherence to truth, but submission to prejudice. God, when he makes the prophet, does not unmake the man. Error is none the better for being common, nor truth the worse for having lain neglected. Anger is uneasiness or discomposure of the mind upon the receipt of any injury, with a present purpose of revenge. Knowledge being to be had only a visible and certain truth, error is not a fault of our knowledge, but a mistake of our judgment, giving assent to that which is not true. Children generally hate to be idle. All the care then is that their busy humor should be constantly employed in something of use to them. Those are not at all to be tolerated who deny the being of God. Promises, covenants, and oaths, which are the bonds of human society, can have no hold upon an atheist. The taking away of God, though but even in thought, dissolves all. Certain subjects yield a general power that may be applied in any direction and should be studied by all. Hence it is a mistake to think that the supreme or legislative power of any commonwealth can do what it will, and dispose of the estates of the subject arbitrarily, or take any part of them at pleasure. The Church which taught men not to keep faith with heretics had no claim to toleration. I do not say this, that I think there should be no difference of opinions in conversation, nor opposition in men's discourses. 'Tis not the owning one's dissent from another, that I speak against, but the manner of doing it. Faith is the assent to any proposition not made out by the deduction of reason but upon the credit of the proposer. To give a man full knowledge of morality, I would send him to no other book than the New Testament. There are two sides, two players. One is light, the other is dark. With books we stand on the shoulders of giants. When we know our own strength, we shall the better know what to undertake with hopes of success. Don't let the things you don't have prevent you from using what you do have. That which parents should take care of, is to distinguish between the wants of fancy, and those of nature. And thus the community perpetually retains a supreme power of saving themselves from the attempts and designs of anybody, even of their legislators, whenever they shall be so foolish, or so wicked, as to lay and carry on designs against the liberties and properties of the subject. Books seem to me to be pestilent things, and infect all that trade in them, with something very perverse and brutal. Printers, binders, sellers, and others that make a trade and gain out of them have universally so odd a turn and corruption of mind that they have a way of dealing peculiar to themselves, and not conform to the good of society and that general fairness which cements mankind. The great art to learn much is to undertake a little at a time. How much education may reconcile young people to pain and sufferance, the examples of Sparta do sufficiently shew. And they who have once brought themselves not to think bodily pain the greatest of evils, or that which they ought to stand most in fear of, have made no small advance toward virtue. This is to think, that men are so foolish, that they take care to avoid what mischiefs may be done them by polecats or foxes, but are content, nay, think it safety, to be devoured by lions. He that would seriously set upon the search of truth, ought in the first place to prepare his mind with a love of it. For he that loves it not, will not take much pains to get it, nor be much concerned when he misses it. This is my destiny, I'm supposed to do this, damn it. Don't tell me what I can and can't do. 'Tis true that governments cannot be supported without great charge, and it is fit everyone who enjoys a share of protection should pay out of his estate his proportion of the maintenance of it. In my opinion, understanding who your target audience is, and what they want, and writing to them, and only them, is the most important component of being successful as an author. Mathematical proofs, like diamonds, are hard and clear, and will be touched with nothing but strict reasoning. Struggle is nature's way of strengthening it. How then shall they have the play games you allow them, if none must be bought for them? I answer, they should make them themselves, or at least endeavor it, and set themselves about it. And if you help them where they are at a stand, it will more endear you to them than any chargeable toys that you shall buy for them. The care of souls cannot belong to the civil magistrate. Thirdly, the supreme power cannot take from any man any part of his property without his own consent, for the preservation of property being the end of government, and that for which men enter into society, it necessarily supposes and requires that the people should have property, without which they must be supposed to lose that, by entering into society, which was the end for which they entered into it, too gross an absurdity for any man to own. Though the water running in the fountain be every one's, yet who can doubt, but that in the pitcher is his only who drew it out? Thus the law of nature stands as an eternal rule to all men, legislators as well as others. The rules that they make for other men's actions, must, as well as their own and other men's actions, be conformable to the law of nature, i.e. to the will of God, of which that is a declaration, and the fundamental law of nature being the preservation of mankind, no human sanction can be good, or valid against it. Now, I appeal to the consciences of those that persecute, torment, destroy, and kill other men upon pretense of religion, whether they do it out of friendship and kindness towards them or no. I say, if all this be done merely to make men Christians and procure their salvation, why then do they suffer whoredom, fraud, malice, and such like enormities, which, according to the Apostle, manifestly relish of heathenish corruption, to predominate so much and abound amongst their flocks and people? Revelation in matters where reason cannot judge, or but probably, ought to be hearkened to. First, whatever proposition is revealed, of whose truth our mind, by its natural faculties and notions, cannot judge, that is purely matter of faith, and above reason. There are 1,000 ways to wealth, but only one way to heaven. All the entertainment and talk of history is nothing almost but fighting and killing, and the honor and renown that is bestowed on conquerors, who for the most part are but the great butchers of mankind, farther mislead growing youth, who by this means come to think slaughter the laudable business of mankind, and the most heroic of virtues. Curiosity in children is but an appetite after knowledge, and therefore ought to be encouraged in them, not only as a good sign, but as the great instrument nature has provided to remove that ignorance they were born with, and which, without this busy inquisitiveness, will make them dull and useless creatures. If to break loose from the bounds of reason, and to want that restraint of examination and judgment which keeps us from choosing or doing the worst, be liberty, true liberty, madmen and fools are the only freemen, but yet, I think, nobody would choose to be mad for the sake of such liberty, but he that is mad already. The greatest part of mankind are given up to labor, and enslaved to the necessity of their mean condition, whose lives are worn out only in the provisions for living. The chief art of learning is to attempt but a little at a time. Men being, as has been said, by nature, all free, equal, and independent, no one can be put out of this estate, and subjected to the political power of another, without his own consent. The necessity of pursuing true happiness is the foundation of all liberty. Happiness, in its full extent, is the utmost pleasure we are capable of. This is that which I think great readers are apt to be mistaken in. Those who have read of everything are thought to understand everything too, but it is not always so. Reading furnishes the mind only with materials of knowledge. It is thinking that makes what we read ours. We are of the ruminating kind, and it is not enough to cram ourselves with a great load of collections, unless we chew them over again. They will not give us strength and nourishment. If punishment reaches not the mind and makes not the will supple, it hardens the offender. Practice conquers the habit of doing, without reflecting on the rule. In all things, therefore, where we have clear evidence from our ideas, and those principles of knowledge I have above mentioned, reason is the proper judge, and revelation, though it may, in consenting with it, confirm its dictates, yet cannot in such cases invalidate its decrees, nor can we be obliged, where we have the clear and evident sentience of reason, to quit it for the contrary opinion, under a pretense that it is matter of faith, which can have no authority against the plain and clear dictates of reason. If we will disbelieve everything, because we cannot certainly know all things, we shall do much what as wisely as he who would not use his legs, but sit still and perish, because he had no wings to fly. When the sacredness of property is talked of, it should be remembered that any such sacredness does not belong in the same degree to landed property. Had you or I been born at the Bay of Soldania, possibly our thoughts and notions had not exceeded those brutish ones of the Hottentots that inhabit there, and had the Virginia King Apicancana been educated in England, he had, perhaps, been as knowing a divine, and as good a mathematician as any in it. The difference between him and a more improved Englishman, lying barely in this, that the exercise of his facilities was bounded within the ways, modes, and notions of his own country, and never directed to any other or farther inquiries. The body of people may with respect resist intolerable tyranny. General observations drawn from particulars are the jewels of knowledge, comprehending great store in a little room. But they are therefore to be made with the greater care and caution, lest, if we take counterfeit for true, our loss and shame be the greater when our stock comes to a severe scrutiny. Consciousness is the perception of what passes in man's own mind. Action is the great business of mankind, and the whole matter about which all laws are conversant. Truth, like gold, is not less so for being newly brought out of the mine. Reason is natural revelation, whereby the eternal Father of light, and fountain of all knowledge, communicates to mankind that portion of truth which he has laid within the reach of their natural faculties. Revelation is natural reason enlarged by a new set of discoveries communicated by God. Affectation is an awkward and forced imitation of what should be genuine and easy, wanting the beauty that accompanies what is natural. Though the familiar use of things about us take off our wonder, yet it cures not our ignorance. It is reported of that prodigy of parts, Monsieur Pascal, that till the decay of his health had impaired his memory, he forgot nothing of what he had done, read, or thought, in any part of his rational age. This is a privilege so little known to most men, that it seems almost incredible to those who, after the ordinary way, measure all others by themselves, but yet, when considered, may help us to enlarge our thoughts towards greater perfections of it, in superior ranks of spirits. If, then, there must be something eternal, let us see what sort of being it must be. And to that it is very obvious to reason, that it must necessarily be a cogitative being. For it is as impossible to conceive that ever bare incogitative matter should produce a thinking intelligent being, as that nothing should of itself produce matter. Knowledge is grateful to the understanding, as light to the eyes. Long discourses, and philosophical readings, at best, amaze and confound, but do not instruct children. When I say, therefore, that they must be treated as rational creatures, I mean that you must make them sensible, by the mildness of your carriage, and in the composure even in the correction of them, that what you do is reasonable in you, and useful and necessary for them, and that it is not out of capriccio, passion or fancy, that you command or forbid them anything. Beating is the worst, and therefore the last means to be used in the correction of children, and that only in the cases of extremity, after all gently ways have been tried, and proved unsuccessful, which, if well observed, there will very seldom be any need of blows. In transgressing the law of nature, the offender declares himself to live by another rule than that of reason and common equity. Reason, if consulted with, would advise, that their children's time should be spent in acquiring what might be useful to them when they come to be men, rather than to have their heads stuffed with a deal of trash, a great part whereof they usually never do, 'tis certain they never need to, think on again as long as they live, and so much of it as does stick by them they are only the worse for. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges every one, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind, who will but consult it. Certainly great persons had need to borrow other men's opinions to think themselves happy, for if they judge by their own feeling, they cannot find it. But if they think with themselves what other men think of them, and that other men would fain be as they are, then they are happy as it were by report, when, perhaps, they find the contrary within. I esteem it above all things necessary to distinguish exactly the business of civil government from that of religion and to settle the just bounds that lie between the one and the other. As the magistrate has no power to impose by his laws the use of any rites and ceremonies in any church, so neither has he any power to forbid the use of such rites and ceremonies as are already received, approved, and practiced by any church, because if he did so, he would destroy the church itself, the end of whose institution is only to worship God with freedom, after its own manner. Try all things, hold fast that which is good. Neither the inveterateness of the mischief, nor the prevalency of the fashion, shall be any excuse for those who will not take care about the meaning of their own words, and will not suffer the insignificancy of their expressions to be inquired into. Laws provide, as much as is possible, that the goods and health of subjects be not injured by the fraud and violence of others. They do not guard them from the negligence or ill husbandry of the possessors themselves. You shall find that there cannot be a greater spur to the attaining what you would have the eldest learn, and know himself, than to set him upon teaching it his younger brothers and sisters. God is the place of spirits, as spaces are the places of bodies. When I had gone through the whole, and saw what a plain, simple, reasonable thing Christianity was, suited to all conditions and capacities, and in the morality of it now, with divine authority, established into a legible law, so far surpassing all that philosophy and human reason had attained to, or could possibly make effectual to all degrees of mankind, I was flattered to think it might be of some use in the world. Nobody is made anything by hearing of rules, or laying them up in his memory. Practice must settle the habit of doing, without reflecting on the rule, and you may as well hope to make a good painter, or musician, extempore, by a lecture and instruction in the arts of music and painting, as a coherent thinker, or a strict reasoner, by a set of rules, showing him wherein right reasoning consists. The Indians, whom we call barbarous, observe much more decency and civility in their discourses and conversation, giving one another a fair silent hearing till they have quite done, and then answering them calmly, and without noise or passion. And if it be not so in this civilized part of the world, we must impute it to a neglect in education, which has not yet reformed this antient piece of barbarity amongst us. For it will be very difficult to persuade men of sense that he who with dry eyes and satisfaction of mind can deliver his brother to the executioner to be burnt alive, does sincerely and heartily concern himself to save that brother from the flames of hell in the world to come. False and doubtful positions, relied upon as unquestionable maxims, keep those who build on them in the dark from truth. Such are usually the prejudices imbibed from education, party, reverence, fashion, interest, etc. The only thing we are naturally afraid of is pain, or loss of pleasure. And because these are not annexed to any shape, color, or size of visible objects, we are frightened of none of them, till either we have felt pain from them, or have notions put into us that they will do us harm. Many a good poetic vein is buried under a trade, and never produces anything for want of improvement. Whoever has used what means he is capable of, for the informing of himself, with a readiness to believe and obey what shall be taught and prescribed by Jesus, his Lord and King, is a true and faithful subject of Christ's kingdom, and cannot be thought to fail in anything necessary to salvation. The difference, so observable in men's understandings and parts, does not arise so much from their natural faculties, as acquired habits. We are all a sort of chameleons, that still take a tincture from things near us, nor is it to be wondered at in children, who better understand what they see than what they hear. Children should from the beginning be bred up in an abhorrence of killing or tormenting any living creature, and be taught not to spoil or destroy anything, unless it be for the preservation or advantage of some other that is nobler. Whosoever is found variable, and changeth manifestly without manifest cause, giveth suspicion of corruption. Therefore, always, when thou changest thine opinion or course, profess it plainly, and declare it, together with the reasons that move thee to change. Where danger shews itself, apprehension cannot, without stupidity, be wanting. Where danger is, sense of danger should be, and so much fear as should keep us awake, and excite our attention, industry, and vigor, but not to disturb the calm use of our reason, nor hinder the execution of what that dictates. Children, nay, and men too, do most by example. All rising to great place is by a winding stair, and if there be factions, it is good to side a man's self whilst he is in the rising, and to balance himself when he is placed. Beware how in making the portraiture thou breakest the pattern, for divinity mocketh the love of ourselves the pattern, the love of our neighbors but the portraiture. The only fence against the world is a thorough knowledge of it, into which a young gentleman should be entered by degrees, as he can bear it, and the earlier the better, so he be in safe and skilful hands to guide him. Moral laws are set as a curb and restraint to these exorbitant desires, which they cannot be but by rewards and punishments, that will overbalance the satisfaction any one shall propose to himself in the breach of the law. The inclination to goodness is imprinted deeply in the nature of man, insomuch, that if it issue not towards men, it will take unto other living creatures, as it is seen in the Turks, cruel people, who, nevertheless, are kind to beasts, and give alms to dogs and birds. Men in great place are thrice servants, servants of the sovereign state, servants of fame, and servants of business, so as they have no freedom, neither in their persons, nor in their actions, nor in their times. It is a strange desire to seek power and to lose liberty, or to seek power over others, and to lose power over a man's self. It is therefore worthwhile to search out the bounds between opinion and knowledge, and examine by what measures, in things, whereof we have no certain knowledge, we ought to regulate our assent, and moderate our persuasions. Man is not permitted without censure to follow his own thoughts in the search of truth, when they lead him ever so little out of the common road. Inuring children gently to suffer some degrees of pain without shrinking, is a way to gain firmness to their minds, and lay a foundation for courage and resolution in the future part of their lives. Power to do good is the true and lawful act of aspiring, for good thoughts, though God accept them, yet towards men are little better than good dreams, except they be put in act, and that cannot be without power and place, as the vantage and commanding ground. The native and untaught suggestions of inquisitive children do often offer things that may set a considering man's thoughts on work. And I think there is frequently more to be learned from the unexpected questions of a child than the discourses of men, who talk in a road, according to the notions they have borrowed, and the prejudices of their education. As it is in the body, so it is in the mind. Practice makes it what it is, and most even of those excellencies, what are looked on as natural endowments, will be found, when examined into more narrowly, to be the product of exercise, and to be raised to that pitch only by repeated actions. When fashion hath once established what folly or craft began, custom makes it sacred, and 'twill be thought impudence or madness, to contradict or question it. A father would do well, as his son grows up, and is capable of it, to talk familiarly with him, nay, ask his advice, and consult with him about those things wherein he has any knowledge or understanding. By this, the father will gain two things, both of great moment. The sooner you treat him as a man, the sooner he will begin to be one, and if you admit him into serious discourses sometimes with you, you will insensibly raise his mind above the usual amusements of youth, and those trifling occupations which it is commonly wasted in. The mind being, as I have declared, furnished with a great number of the simple ideas conveyed in by the senses, as they are found in exterior things, or by reflection on its own operations, take notice, also, that a certain number of these simple ideas go constantly together, which, by inadvertency, we apt afterward to talk of and conjecture as one simple idea. We are born with faculties and powers capable almost of anything, such at least as would carry us farther than can easily be imagined. But it is only the exercise of those powers, which gives us ability and skill in anything, and leads us towards perfection. Who hath a prospect of the different state of perfect happiness or misery that attends all men after this life, depending on their behavior. The measures of good and evil that govern his choice are mightily changed. Brutes abstract not. If it may be doubted, whether beasts compound and enlarge their ideas, that way, to any degree, this, I think, I may be positive in, that the power of abstracting is not at all in them, and that the having of general ideas is that which puts a perfect distinction betwixt man and brutes. and is an excellency which the faculties of brutes do by no means attain to. Children have as much mind to show that they are free, that their own good actions come from themselves, that they are absolute and independent, as any of the proudest of you grown men. Think of them as you please. So that, in effect, religion, which should most distinguish us from beasts, and ought most peculiarly to elevate us, as rational creatures, above brutes, is that wherein men often appear most irrational, and more senseless than beasts themselves. In the discharge of thy place set before thee the best examples, for imitation is a globe of precepts. I doubt not, but from self-evident propositions, by necessary consequences, as incontestable as those in mathematics, the measures of right and wrong might be made out. The rising unto place is laborious, and by pains men come to greater pains, and it is sometimes base, and by indignities men come to dignities. It is practice alone that brings the powers of the mind, as well as those of the body, to their perfection. A king is a mortal god on earth, unto whom the living God hath lent his own name as a great honor, but withal told him, he should die like a man, lest he should be proud, and flatter himself that God hath with his name imparted unto him his nature also. I pretend not to teach, but to inquire. For those who either perceive but dully, or retain the ideas that come into their minds but ill, who cannot readily excite or compound them, will have little matter to think on. If we trace the progress of our minds, and with attention observe how it repeats, adds together, and unites its simple ideas received from sensation or reflection, it will lead us farther than at first, perhaps, we should have imagined. It is hard to know what other way men can come to truth, to lay hold of it, if they do not dig and search for it as for gold and hid treasure, but he that does so, must have much earth and rubbish, before he gets the pure metal, sand, and pebbles, and dross usually lie blended with it, but the gold is nevertheless gold, and will enrich the man that employs his pains to seek and separate it. If the gospel and the apostles may be credited, no man can be a Christian without charity, and without that faith which works, not by force, but by love. Defects and weakness in men's understandings, as well as other faculties, come from want of a right use of their own minds, I am apt to think. The fault is generally mislaid upon nature, and there is often a complaint of want of parts, when the fault lies in want of a due improvement of them. Merit in good works is the end of man's motion, and conscience of the same is the accomplishment of man's rest, for if a man can be partaker of God's theatre, he shall likewise be partaker of God's rest. I am sure, zeal or love for truth can never permit falsehood to be used in the defense of it. What if everything that happened here, happened for a reason? The ideas of primary qualities of bodies are resemblances of them, and their patterns do really exist in the bodies themselves, but the ideas, produced in us by these secondary qualities, have no resemblance of them at all. There is nothing like our ideas, existing in the bodies themselves. They are in bodies, we denominate from them only a power to produce those sensations in us, and what is sweet, blue, or warm in idea, is but the certain bulk, figure, and motion of the insensible parts in the bodies themselves, which we call so. Good and evil, reward and punishment, are the only motives to a rational creature. A man may live long, and die at last in ignorance of many truths, which his mind was capable of knowing, and that with certainty. A sound mind in a sound body is a short but full description of a happy state in this world. Let the awe, the teacher, has upon children's minds be so tempered with the constant marks of tenderness and goodwill, that affection may spur them to their duty, and make them find a pleasure in complying with his dictates. This will bring them with satisfaction to their tutor, make them hearken to him, as to one who is their friend, that cherishes them, and takes pains for their good. This will keep their thoughts easy and free, whilst they are with him, the only temper wherein the mind is capable of receiving new information, and of admitting into itself those impressions. As children's inquiries are not to be slighted, so also great care is to be taken, that they never receive deceitful and eluding answers. They easily perceive when they are slighted or deceived, and quickly learn the trick of neglect, dissimulation, and falsehood, which they observe others to make use of. We are not to entrench upon truth in any conversation, but least of all with children, since, if we play false with them, we not only deceive their expectation, and hinder their knowledge, but corrupt their innocence, and teach them the worst of vices. I find every sect, as far as reason will help them, make use of it gladly, and where it fails them, they cry out, it is a matter of faith, and above reason. As usurpation is the exercise of power which another has a right to, so tyranny is the exercise of power beyond right, which nobody can have a right to. So difficult it is to show the various meanings and imperfections of words when we have nothing else but words to do it with. Vague and mysterious forms of speech, and abuse of language, have so long passed for mysteries of science, and hard or misapplied words with little or no meaning have, by prescription, such a right to be mistaken for deep learning and height of speculation, that it will not be easy to persuade either those who speak or those who hear them, that they are but the covers of ignorance and hindrance of true knowledge. Earthly minds, like mud walls, resist the strongest batteries, and though, perhaps, sometimes the force of a clear argument may make some impression, yet they nevertheless stand firm, keep out the enemy, truth, that would captivate or disturb them. The thoughts that come often unsought, and, as it were, drop into the mind, are commonly the most valuable of any we have. The least and most imperceptible impressions received in our infancy have consequences very important and of long duration. Truth certainly would do well enough, if she were once left to shift for herself. She is not taught by laws, nor has she any need of force, to procure her entrance into the minds of men. Success in fighting means not coming at your opponent the way he wants to fight you. The acts of the mind, wherein it exerts its power over simple ideas, are chiefly these three: 1. Combining several simple ideas into one compound one, and thus all complex ideas are made. 2. The second is bringing two ideas, whether simple or complex, together, and setting them by one another so as to take a view of them at once, without uniting them into one, by which it gets all its ideas of relations. 3. The third is separating them from all other ideas that accompany them in their real existence. This is called abstraction, and thus all its general ideas are made. Justice and truth are the common ties of society. The works of nature and the works of revelation display religion to mankind in characters so large and visible that those who are not quite blind may in them see and read the first principles and most necessary parts of it, and from thence pen it into those infinite depths filled with the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Not time is the measure of movement, but each constant periodic appearance of ideas. The business of education is not to make the young perfect in any one of the sciences, but so to open and dispose their minds as may best make them capable of any, when they shall apply themselves to it. For where is the man that has incontestable evidence of the truth of all that he holds, or of the falsehood of all he condemns, or can say that he has examined to the bottom all his own, or other men's opinions? The necessity of believing without knowledge, nay often upon very slight grounds, in this fleeting state of action and blindness we are in, should make us more busy and careful to inform ourselves than constrain others. The commonwealth of learning is not at this time without master builders, whose mighty designs, in advancing the sciences, will leave lasting monuments to the admiration of posterity, but every one must not hope to be a Boyle, or a Sydenham, and in an age that produces such masters as the great white genius, and the incomparable Mr. Newton, with some other of that strain, 'tis ambition enough to be employed as an underlaborer in clearing ground a little, and removing some of the rubbish that lies in the way to knowledge. Understanding, like the eye, whilst it makes us see and perceive all things, takes no notice of itself, and it requires art and pains to set it at a distance and make it its own subject. The mind is furnished with ideas by experience alone. The picture of a shadow is a positive thing. Nature never makes excellent things, for mean or no uses, and it is hardly to be conceived, that our infinitely wise Creator should make so admirable a faculty, as the power of thinking, that faculty which comes nearest the excellency of His own incomprehensible being, to be so idly and uselessly employed. at least 14 part of its time here, as to think constantly, without remembering any of those thoughts, without doing any good to itself or others, or being any way useful to any other part of creation. Truth then seems to me, in the proper import of the word, to signify nothing but the joining or separating of signs, as the things signified by them do agree or disagree one with another. The joining or separating of signs here meant, is what by another name we call proposition. So that truth properly belongs only to propositions, whereof there are two sorts, viz. mental and verbal, as there are two sorts of signs commonly made use of, viz. ideas and words. Crooked things may be as stiff and unflexible as straight, and men may be as positive and peremptory in error as in truth. Let us suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas. How comes it to be furnished? Whence comes it by that vast store which the busy and boundless fancy of man has painted on it with an almost endless variety? Whence has it all the materials of reason and knowledge? To this I answer, in one word, from experience. From whence it is obvious to conclude that, since our faculties are not fitted to penetrate into the internal fabric and real essences of bodies, but yet plainly discover to us the being of a God, and the knowledge of ourselves, enough to lead us into a full and clear discovery of our duty and great concernment, it will become us, as rational creatures, to employ those faculties we have about what they are most adapted to, and follow the direction of nature, where it seems to point us out the way. Where there is no desire, there will be no industry. Curiosity in children is but an appetite for knowledge. The senses at first let in particular ideas, and furnish the yet empty cabinet, and the mind by degrees growing familiar with some of them, they are lodged in the memory, and names got to them. Every man being conscious to himself, that he thinks, and that which his mind is employed about whilst thinking, being the ideas, that are there, 'tis past doubt, that men have in their minds several ideas, such as are those expressed by the words, whiteness, hardness, sweetness, thinking, motion, man, elephant, army, drunkenness, and others. It is in the first place then to be inquired, how he comes by them. I know it is a received doctrine, that men have native ideas, and original characters stamped upon their minds, in their very first being. He that in the ordinary affairs of life would admit of nothing but direct plain demonstration would be sure of nothing in this world but of perishing quickly. Whosoever will list himself under the banner of Christ, must, in the first place and above all things, make war upon his own lusts and vices. It is in vain for any man to usurp the name of Christian, without holiness of life, purity of manners, benignity and meekness of spirit. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. In the beginning, all the world was America. Virtue is everywhere that which is thought praiseworthy, and nothing else but that which has the allowance of public esteem is called virtue. To ask at what time a man has first any ideas is to ask when he begins to perceive, having ideas and perception being the same thing. Habits were more constantly and with greatest force than reason, which, when we have most need of it, is seldom fairly consulted, and more rarely obeyed. He that judges without informing himself to the utmost that he is capable, cannot acquit himself of judging amiss. I thought that I had no time for faith nor time to pray, then I saw an armless man saying his rosary with his feet. Probability is a kind of penance, which God made, suitable, I presume, to that state of mediocrity and probationership he has been pleased to place us in here, wherein, to check our overconfidence and presumption, we might, by every day's experience, be made sensible of our short-sightedness, and liableness to error. He that makes use of another's fancy or necessity to sell ribbons or cloth dearer to him than to another man at the same time, cheats him. Since nothing appears to me to give children so much becoming confidence and behavior, and so raise them to the conversation of those above their age, as dancing, I think they should be taught to dance as soon as they are capable of learning it. He that will make good use of any part of his life must allow a large part of it to recreation. The tendency to cruelty should be watched in children, and if they incline to any such cruelty, they should be taught the contrary usage. For the custom of tormenting and killing other animals will, by degrees, harden their hearts even toward man. Children should from the beginning be brought up in an abhorrence of killing or tormenting living beings. He that has his chains knocked off, and the prison doors set open to him, is perfectly at liberty, because he may either go or stay, as he best likes, though his preference be determined to stay, by the darkness of the night, or illness of the weather, or want of other lodging. Whensoever, therefore, the legislative shall transgress this fundamental rule of society, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption, endeavor to grasp themselves, or put into the hands of any other, an absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates of the people, by this breach of trust they forfeit the power the people had put into the hands, and it devolves to the people, who have a right to resume their original liberty, and provide for their own safety and security. Men's happiness or misery is, for the most part, of their own making. If by gaining knowledge we destroy our health, we labor for a thing that will be useless in our hands. How long have you been holding those words in your head, hoping to use them? We are like chameleons, we take our hue and the color of our moral character from those who are around us. The visible mark of extraordinary wisdom and power appears so plainly in all the works of creation. A young man, before he leaves the shelter of his father's house, and the guard of a tutor, should be fortified with resolution, and made acquainted with men, to secure his virtues, lest he should be led into some ruinous course, or fatal precipice, before he is sufficiently acquainted with the dangers of conversation, and his steadiness enough not to yield to every temptation. Don't tell me what I can't do. There is no such way to gain admittance, or give defense to strange and absurd doctrines, as to guard them round about with legions of obscure, doubtful, and undefined words. But there is only one thing which gathers people into seditious commotion, and that is oppression. Men in great fortunes are strangers to themselves, and while they are in the puzzle of business, they have no time to tend their health either of body or mind. Let not men think there is no truth, but in the sciences that they study, or the books that they read. Slavery is so vile and miserable an estate of man, and so directly opposite to the generous temper and courage of our nation, that 'tis hardly to be conceived, that an Englishman, much less a gentleman, should plead for it. Every man has a property in his own person. This no body has any right to but himself. The labor of his body, and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. The great and chief end therefore, of men's uniting into commonwealths, and putting themselves under government, is the preservation of their property. And because it may be too great a temptation to human frailty, apt to grasp at power, for the same persons, who have the power of making laws, to have also in their hands the power to execute them, whereby they may exempt themselves from obedience to the laws they make, and suit the law, both in its making and execution, to their own private advantage. Freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society and made by the legislative power vested in it, and not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, arbitrary will of another man. Whoever uses force without right, puts himself into a state of war with those, against whom he uses it, and in that state all former ties are cancelled, all other rights cease, and every one has a right to defend himself, and to resist the aggressor. Who are we to tell anyone what they can or can't do? Being reasonable and just, I should have a right to destroy that which threatens me with destruction, for by the fundamental law of nature, man being to be preserved as much as possible, when all cannot be preserved, the safety of the innocent is to be preferred, and one may destroy a man who makes war upon him, or has discovered an enmity to his being, for the same reason that he may kill a wolf or a lion. If the innocent honest man must quietly quit all he has for peace sake, to him who will lay violent hands upon it, I desire it may be considered what kind of peace there will be in the world, which consists only in violence and rapine, and which is to be maintained only for the benefit of robbers and oppressors. Our business here is not to know all things, but those which concern our conduct. In short, Herein seems to lie the difference between idiots and madmen, that madmen put wrong ideas together, and so make wrong propositions, but argue and reason right from them, but idiots make very few or no propositions, and reason scarce at all. The people cannot delegate to government the power to do anything which would be unlawful for them to do themselves. To understand political power right, and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is, a state of perfect freedom to order their actions, and dispose of their possessions and persons, as they think fit, within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave, or depending upon the will of any other man. There cannot any one moral rule be proposed whereof a man may not justly demand a reason. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The people cannot delegate to government the power to do anything which would be unlawful for them to do themselves. For a man's property is not at all secure, though there be good and equitable laws to set the bounds of it, between him and his fellow subjects. If he who commands those subjects have power to take from any private man what part he pleases of his property, and use and dispose of it as he thinks good. 'Tis a mistake to think this fault, tyranny, is proper only to monarchies. Other forms of government are liable to it, as well as that. For wherever the power that is put in any hands for the government of the people, and the preservation of their properties, is applied to other ends, and made use of to impoverish, harass, or subdue them to the arbitrary and irregular commands of those that have it, there it presently becomes tyranny, whether those that thus use it are one or many. If you punish him for what he sees you practice yourself, he will be apt to interpret it the peevishness and arbitrary imperiousness of a father, who, without any ground for it, would deny his son the liberty and pleasure he takes himself. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe. What humanity abhors, custom reconciles and recommends to us. The great question which, in all ages, has disturbed mankind, and brought on them the greatest part of their mischiefs, has been, not whether be power in the world, nor whence it came, but who should have it. He that uses his words loosely and unsteadily will either not be minded or not understood. I have no reason to suppose that he, who would take away my liberty, would not, when he had me in his power, take away everything else. All wealth is the product of labor. To love truth for truth's sake is the principal part of human perfection in this world, and the seed plot of all other virtues. The power of the legislative being derived from the people by a positive voluntary grant and institution, can be no other than what that positive grant conveyed, which being only to make laws, and not to make legislators, the legislative can have no power to transfer their authority of making laws, and place it in other hands. Individuals, have a right to defend themselves and recover by force what by unlawful force is taken from them. The legislative cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands. For it being but a delegated power from the people, they who have it, cannot pass it over to others. The people alone can appoint the form of the commonwealth, which is by constituting the legislative, and appointing in whose hands that shall be. No peace and security among mankind, let alone common friendship, can ever exist as long as people think that governments get their authority from God and that religion is to be propagated by force of arms. Whenever legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience. He that will have his son have respect for him and his orders, must himself have a great reverence for his son. A criminal who, having renounced reason, hath, by the unjust violence and slaughter he hath committed upon one, declared war against all mankind, and therefore may be destroyed as a lion or tiger, one of those wild savage beasts with whom men can have no society nor security. Where there is no law there is no freedom. That which is static and repetitive is boring. That which is dynamic and random is confusing. In between lies art. The reservedness and distance that fathers keep, often deprive their sons of that refuge which would be of more advantage to them than 100 rebukes or chidings. Logic is the anatomy of thought. It is one thing to persuade, another to command, one thing to press with arguments, another with penalties. Every man carries about him a touchstone, if he will make use of it, to distinguish substantial gold from superficial glitterings, truth from appearances. And indeed the use and benefit of this touchstone, which is natural reason, is spoiled and lost only by assuming prejudices, overweening presumption, and narrowing our minds. Who lies for you will lie against you. Revolt is the right of the people. The most precious of all possessions is power over ourselves. Any single man must judge for himself whether circumstances warrant obedience or resistance to the commands of the civil magistrate. We are all qualified, entitled, and morally obliged to evaluate the conduct of our rulers. This political judgment, moreover, is not simply or primarily a right, but like self-preservation, a duty to God. As such it is a judgment that men cannot part with according to the God of nature. It is the first and foremost of our inalienable rights without which we can preserve no other. Curiosity in children is but an appetite for knowledge. The great reason why children abandon themselves wholly to silly pursuits and trifle away their time insipidly is, because they find their curiosity balked, and their inquiries neglected. If anyone shall claim a power to lay and levy taxes on the people by his own authority and without such consent of the people, he thereby invades the fundamental law of property, and subverts the end of government. Wherever law ends, tyranny begins. What worries you, masters you?